My name is Julie Huber and I manage education and outreach at TGEN. So TGEN is the Translational Genomics Research Institute. That's a mouthful, that's why we call it TGEN. But before I go into exactly what TGEN does, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I grew up in a small town in southern Indiana. My first career was actually archaeology. So it was a lot of fun. I got to excavate Mayan ruins and excavate on the beach, on islands, and all this really cool stuff. But I also really loved teaching. And I could really tell the difference between my students that read about digging square holes and the ones that actually got to go out in the field with me. So I wanted to be part of education outside the classroom. And so since then, I've been working with TGEN to do just that. We get students into the laboratory to be able to do their own research projects under the mentorship of our scientists, to really try out that career and see if it would be a good fit for them. But we'll talk about that career education stuff a little bit later. I want to start by talking about TGEN and really why it's important. So, in typical medicine today, when people go into a clinic, and let's say they all have the same symptoms, for the most part, they're going to get the same diagnosis and the same treatment. And because the doctor knows what they're doing, they're not pulling this out of thin air, they've gone to school for a long time, learned about the research behind all of this, for the most part, people are going to see benefit from it. But there are two other groups too that happen in this system where they're giving the treatment that works for most people to everybody. You're going to have a group that sees no benefit. Perhaps the symptoms were the same on the surface, but something else was going on a molecular level. For other people, they might see side effects. So we've all seen those drug commercials where they start talking about all these terrible things that happen to you when you take this drug. Well, that's a reality for some patients. Now, TGEN is about changing this system. You know, medicine, it can always be better. It can always serve more people. It can always make people healthier. It can always prevent more disease. And that's what TGEN wants to do, is move us towards a model of precision medicine. Now, in precision medicine, before you decided on a diagnosis and before you decided on a treatment, you would look at their DNA to see how each of these individual patients is different and how they're the same. And when you do that, you can really siphon out who's going to land in what group and get them the right treatment the first time, without going through the trial and error of finding out who isn't going to fit within the standard of care of the medicine they typically give to people. That's exciting, right? That's the future of medicine. As we are able to get more and more information about ourselves, we can tailor treatments more to individual people. We're not there yet, we're getting there. So where TGEN works today is by developing that system to help move that along, but also they work with groups that are on the sides here, the ones that originally saw no effect and the ones that saw a lot of side effects. We work with them to find the next best treatment, to give them that hope. They went through the standard of care and it did not work for them. So what can TGEN do to improve their lives? So let's talk about where TGEN is. So TGEN is right downtown Phoenix. That's our headquarters. We also have a location up in Flagstaff. That's TGEN North. It's our infectious disease unit. And it's always been in it's always been in Arizona. TGEN is an Arizona company. So, in a nutshell, TGEN is a private, non-profit research institute performing genomic research on complex diseases and disorders such as cancer, neurological disease, and infectious disease. TGEN's mission is to make and translate discoveries into diagnostics, therapies, and treatments tailored to the unique needs of individual patients. So let's talk about the science behind that. This is actually not what our scientists look like, although some people might think so. This is what they really look like. So TGEN is a company of about 200 people, and of that company, these are really the leaders. These are the ones that head the labs, they have the PhDs, and they're deciding what they're going to do in their research, what projects they're going to do moving forward, how they're going to get the funding for that. They're really deciding the direction of our research and how we can best help patients. Now, most of these scientists are working with the human genome. Now, when I talk about the human genome, I'm talking about all of the DNA in your cells. Not just the parts of it we know a lot about, not just, the parts we can find, but we're looking at all the letters in your DNA. That's what I mean when I mean your genome. It's all of it. So that's 3 billion letters that we can start from to get a better idea of who that patient is and how they'll respond to different treatments. But you might remember that DNA is just the recipe for you. And I mean, that's great to know, but if you're trying to decide what the best brownies are, you don't want to see just the recipe, you want to see the brownies too, right? So this is where we get to the brownies. If we continue that metaphor, DNA would be the recipe you got off the website. You found it on the website. Okay, that's how I make brownies. The RNA is the page you print out to bring the recipe to the kitchen in order to make it. And then protein are the actual brownies. So if we're going to understand the full process of disease, we have to look at all 3 layers here. Although today, where science is, DNA is much more accessible. We're much easier to work. It's much easier to work with DNA than the other parts and to fully understand them. So a lot of our scientists work with DNA, but you'll also see work on the 2 other areas as well. So I'll give you an example of exactly how this can help patients. So TGEN itself doesn't see patients at the Institute. We are the research side. So we collaborate with physicians that are seeing patients that are looking for that next hope, that have tried everything in the medical system and need another avenue. And one way we do that is through clinical trials. So there are clinical trials at Honor Health's Virginia G. Piper Cancer Center. And what clinical trials are is patients will go through standard of care, which is what they typically prescribe whenever you have something, and it didn't work for them. So these are treatments that are a little bit more experimental. They've shown great promise. They've tried it in other models, they've tried it on some people, but now they're going to broaden it and try it with more people to see how they'll respond and to make sure that it's actually better than what's on the market today. So at these clinical trials, TGEN has several studies, and a few years ago there was a study with pancreatic cancer patients. They were in the final stages. And it's usually pretty bleak at that point. Some of those patients aren't expected to live much longer than weeks. When we sequenced their DNA to get the full string of letters that was in their cells, their recipe, what Ijen Scientist found was they had a change in their DNA, a mutation that was common in breast cancer patients. And what this mutation did was create a barrier around the cancer cells, so the pancreatic cancer drugs weren't even being delivered, which means we didn't even know if they worked. Believe it or not, there was already a drug on the market that breast cancer patients were taking that could fix this problem. So when we added that drug to the drugs they were already taking, it extended their lives for a matter of months, which is huge, the final stages of pancreatic cancer. But who would have thought to give a breast cancer drug to a pancreatic cancer patient unless you looked at their genome? And that's really the power of the approach. But you can also say, I mean, a couple of months is great, and it's really cool to know that the standard of care now for pancreatic cancer came from TGEN. If you have pancreatic cancer, that's the first line of defense, is what TGEN discovered. But it's not quite enough yet, is it? We want more than a few months for those patients. So our pancreatic cancer team continues to work to find the next best treatment. But you know what would be even better? Is if we discovered that cancer before it was even a problem, when it was easy to stamp out, when we would have more options for those patients available than when it's the last hope. So TGEN also focuses on early detection, catching things early. One way they do that, this is really neat, is through circulating tumor DNA. So think about a tumor, it's a lot of cell growth, right? So there's a lot more cell death as well. So when those cells die, they release their DNA into your bloodstream. So imagine if you could go in for a physical and they could take a simple blood draw and then they could tell you if there's any tumor DNA in your blood. That would mean you wouldn't have to wait for symptoms to show, you wouldn't have to know where the tumor was, but you would know if something was wrong. TGEN is working on that technology today. Exciting stuff. So where did this TGEN thing come from? What's the origin story? How many of you are familiar with the Human Genome Project? Anybody? Okay, a couple hands. Most of the teachers, that's fine. So the Human Genome Project was the first time an entire human genome was sequenced. This was a government project that happened mostly through the 90s. And before that, they did not know the full recipe for a human. They maybe knew bits and pieces. Maybe they knew you had to add eggs at some point, and they knew that the dry ingredients had to be separate from the wet ingredients for a while, but they couldn't put it all together. And it wasn't until they discovered this technology and started working through it that they were able to get the entire human genome. This took 10, 13 years, depending on how you count it, and $2.7 billion. Now, a director of the Human Genome Project was Dr. Jeffrey Trent. And he wanted to make sure that we didn't just stop there. Yeah, it's cool to have all that information and to know what it is, but you want to make sure you're using that information to help people. So, he looked across the country for a place to put an organization like this. And fortunately for us, he chose Phoenix, Arizona to start TGEN. 2 years after that, the city of Phoenix actually built our research building. We paid rent for a long time, and just this past year, we were able to buy the building from the city to start paying it off ourselves. Excuse me. The idea of putting TGEN here was strategic. The state of Arizona wanted to build its biomedical industry. So TGEN was really just the start. So before TGEN, there was just a big dirt lot in the middle of downtown Phoenix. And they were trying to decide if they were going to put another sports complex there or if they were going to really build on the science downtown. And science won, believe it or not, and they started to build TGEN. After that came a collaborative building for U of A and ASU to do research. And then there was the U of A Med School, and then a huge medical building with all this open lab space, a cancer center, even a bioscience high school. So since then, the biotech, biomedical industry continued to grow in Arizona. So that was really intentional. But we couldn't really do what we're doing today without an improvement in that technology. So going back to that Human Genome Project, 10 years, if you're one of those patients with pancreatic cancer, you don't have 10 years to wait to get your genome sequenced. And you probably don't have $2.7 billion to waste on it. So there are a lot of updates to the sequencers we use today, just in a matter of 16, 17 years. So just shout it out. How long do you think it takes to sequence a human genome today? Keep talking and I'll tell you when you get to it. Keep going.
30 seconds.
Keep going.
Higher or lower?
Higher than most of the ones I'm hearing.
An hour.
Basically 1 day, yeah. About 30 hours and you have an entire human genome. That's wild. So let's talk about price. We went from spending $2.7 billion on the first human genome to spending 10 to 3,000. That's huge. It's a big change. And it means that it's something that patients can actually use to improve their diagnosis, and so that they don't have to go through tests that they don't need. They don't have to go through treatments that aren't going to work. They're going to find that sooner. But this has really switched our problem. So during the Human Genome Project era, we didn't have enough information, right? We were still sequencing that DNA. We didn't have the full picture. But today, we don't have just one sequencer. We have a fleet of them. And so they're always sequencing, getting more patient data, and that means sometimes we have more information than we literally know what to do with. Imagine, every genome is 3 billion letters long, and you have multiple genomes. That's a lot of information. So to deal with this problem, there's been a fairly new field of research come through, and that's bioinformatics. So bioinformatics is when you're working with computers to better understand big biological data sets, big data, right? So we're getting all of this information, and it's up to the bioinformaticians to work with the computers to really bring it down to what's important for that patient, finding that needle in a haystack of the few parts of the genome that might be relevant to their disease. So how many of you like working with computers? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you like video games? Okay, well, there we go. So I mention that because, well, first of all, bioinformatics is continuing to grow. Big data, especially in the medical world, those jobs are going to just become more and more as time goes on. So it's a good one to go into. But also, a lot of people that start as video game developers will end up doing work like these bioinformaticians. I know that some of our bioinformaticians started with video game developing. They really liked it. They liked the coding, but they realized if they worked somewhere like TGEN, instead of just perfecting the wave of a character's hand, they could actually be using that information to help a patient today. Find a solution for someone who could be done. So that's what they do. And they actually have a handy sidekick. They work with the supercomputer. Now, the TGEN supercomputer is just that. It can do 91 trillion calculations per second. And not only that, but it can store 53 years of HD video. These are all very important statistics because, first of all, you want to be able to find the answer fast because, again, our patients are short on time. But also, you want to have the right genomes to compare it to. Now, say a few years before, we had seen a patient and identified a change in their DNA that was important to their treatment. We want to store that so if we ever see that again, we can help those patients too, and faster. So these are both really important things when we're building that computer. In fact, I have a short video for you that'll show you what it's like when our high-performance computing team is installing new cores into this computer. So that's the supercomputer, and it's actually at a basically a computer storage center that's in Tempe. So whenever our bioinformaticians want to log into the supercomputer, they can get onto their normal desktop and log in, and then there's actually a fiber optics cable that goes underground to connect their computer to this big supercomputer in storage. It's a really cool place to visit because I thought this was only in movies, but they would actually scan your eye and do a retina scan to make sure that you're allowed to go back and see the computers. Not only that, but everything is in these big cages because there are a lot of major banks that also use this storage facility. So here are these, there's like Goldman Sachs, and then there's the TGEN computer. And that TGEN computer is just for patient data so they can get information to patients faster. Another cool statistic that I like is up here. If you punched one equation per second in a calculator, it'd take 3 million years to do what our supercomputer does in 1 second. So as a bioinformatician, you aren't only giving answers to patients, but you're working with some really cool toys, I gotta say. But why does it all matter? Because we can look at so many different research areas when you start with that human genome. We study neurological diseases like ALS, autism, migraines, concussions, rare childhood disorders. We look at infectious diseases up at, in Flagstaff at TGEN North. We look at a wide variety of cancers and metabolic diseases. So there's really a lot you can do, and you start with that. Can someone tell me when this class is over? I want to make sure I don't go over. 2:10? Thank you. Okay. So I'll tell you about a few of these projects that are really interesting. Ooh, one of them, I haven't talked about this yet today, but with the brain tumors, one problem is that the tumor isn't all made of the same cell. They're just like anything, this tumor has cells that have different jobs. And for some reason, the cells in the middle of the tumor know to grow, and the cells on the outside of the tumor know to go out into normal tissue. So So you have some cells that are growing like crazy and the ones on the outer rim going into normal tissue, which is exactly what you don't want if you're going to go in and surgically remove that tumor. You want to make sure you can get that tumor out cleanly so it doesn't continue to grow. But if there are cells that are programmed to go into normal tissue, that's going to be an issue for you. So we actually have interns right now, students that are in college that are trying to figure out why some of the cells grow and some of the cells go, because they want to see if they can prevent cells from going into the normal tissue. Really interesting project. We also have the Center for Rare Childhood Disorders. This is for families that have gone from doctor to doctor, never finding a diagnosis for their child. I mean, imagine, you want to know you're doing everything you can for your child's safety and their health, and yet you don't even know what's wrong. So how can you even know if you're doing everything you can? If you go to a typical doctor's office, your chance of getting a diagnosis is about 20 to 25% chance. When you go to the Center for Rare Childhood Disorders, the chances increase to 35 to 40% chance of a diagnosis, and that's huge. And to give you a better idea, I have a short video for you about Shelby, who's gone through this, what we call diagnostic odyssey, this journey to be able to find the treatment she needs.
Shelby was in a wheelchair. She was not able to walk. She was not able to speak. She could not hold up her head. She had a hard time swallowing and eating. She would choke on her foods.
Shelby has a very unique condition. It probably fits into a category of neurological disorders called neurotransmitter metabolism disorders.
Need some help, Bum Bum? 10 years ago, we went to the neurologist who started her on basic tests, MRIs, muscle biopsies, chromosome tests. All these tests were coming back normal. The doctors would exhaust all their efforts to find an answer for her, and once they did that, they couldn't help her anymore. They would put their hands up and be done.
Shelby is an example of many other children that we see where there is no diagnosis. I think that is probably the key, is that we suspect some things, but we do not have an exact diagnosis. And that's what made us think that she would be an excellent candidate for genomic sequencing.
We met Dr. Narayanan, and I knew it was going to be different. He was very interested in her case, and I knew he wasn't going to be just like one of the other doctors. He was going to stick with her to the end, good or bad.
Shelby was declining in her level of function. Mentally, she was as brilliant as she is now, but I was watching her becoming weaker and weaker over the months and years. We were desperate to find a way to treat her, and luckily we had this clue.
We sequence the genome at 3 billion letters long, and we come down to 4 million changes. So of those 4 million changes, there are about 400 or 500, we'll call them novel changes, and we believe in those small number are the clues that can tell us about the most severe events that are affecting a family. In the case of Shelby, one of the ones that stuck out was involved in dopamine.
After we started the treatment, I would say within maybe 3 or 4 months, I was happy to hear that her mom and dad got rid of the wheelchair lift in their van. She was walking to school, able to walk all day long, and I was not worried about her eating anymore. I was not worried about her breathing anymore.
Shelby, to us, demonstrated this can be done. This can be utilized to better understand rare diseases in children, and that we should be doing it.
I was able to go to restaurants, go to school, walking, and it was amazing.
We're not trying to stop there at the genetic diagnosis. We're trying to provide even more information back to the physician, back to the families about how we might now attack this disease. The genetic answer is not the stopping point, but it's the next stage of the journey. It gets us to a new foothold. It's a new answer for these families where, in a lot of cases, they've had none.
I have some advice to give to other disabled children. I know how you're feeling. never give up. Because, even though, there are some hard times, the embarrassment, and make fun of, and not doing stuff other people do. I know how you feel, and it's hard sometimes. I get that. But you just never give up. Don't let anything put you down. Because it's not the end of the world. God made you for a reason, and God never makes mistakes.
Shelby's amazing. She's an incredible kid. Really great to talk to. She'll come to some TGEN events, and it's just amazing to see her face and to see how well she's doing. So for Shelby, what happened was there was an issue with her dopamine production. And that's how your brain communicates with your muscles. So she started on Parkinson's medication, actually, and that's what really helped her feel a lot better and to be able to regain a lot of the function she had lost. Now, it's a happy ending to the story, but another thing to remember is that it's not the end of the story, and she may have other challenges as she grows and as her body gets used to the drugs and things like that. So TGEN will be with her and her family through every step of the way. Not every family is going to get a diagnosis right off the bat like Shelby did. As I mentioned, it's a 35 to 40% chance diagnosis is good, but it's not everybody, as much as we'd love to. So you never give up on that. Every week, our bioinformaticians go back to an old genome to look at it once again and see if now we have enough data, enough information, another study that could shed light on that. And we have had times when we had to tell a family that we couldn't find a diagnosis, and then years later we get to come back to them and say, we finally figured it out. And I'd say that is one of the biggest differences I've heard from my students on what it's like to study science as opposed to be in a career in science. When you're in a career of science, it's really more about solving puzzles, about problem solving, about troubleshooting, about being able to take on something new every day that no one else has done and to do it. And it's actually really exciting because not only is that a fun process, it's something that could mean a lot to a family. So what kind of dog is this? It's a pug, and you know it's a pug because it looks like all the other adorable pugs you've seen. Now that's significant because when dogs are physically similar, like a breed of dog, that means their genomes are very similar as well. Now humans, we're like a bunch of mutts. Our genomes are much messier and a lot harder to tell what's wrong when something goes wrong. Now with the dogs, because their genomes are very similar, when something goes wrong, it's much easier to pinpoint. So pugs get necrotizing meningoencephalitis. So we can study that in pet pugs. So we're not talking about dogs in cages, we're talking about pet dogs that are naturally getting sick. We can study that, better understand it, share that with veterinary medicine, and then use that information to improve human medicine, because in the end, there are a lot of similarities between dog and human genomes. This is also true for dog cancer. Dogs, unfortunately, naturally get cancer as well. So one study, we're looking at lung cancer in dogs. And on the human side, we're seeing a lot more non-smoker lung cancer lately. And it's one that we don't know a lot about and that we're trying to really catch up with and learn more on. But with the dogs, you know they were never smokers. So you can study their lung cancer knowing that you're looking at a non-smoker lung cancer. And there have been some really positive results of them being able to identify a change in the dog's DNA that could have led to that lung cancer. And now the next step is to see if there's a similar mutation in human cancer. So if we're looking at football, what are we studying? I think I heard it. Say it louder. Concussions, yes. We all know it, and yet there's still not a great way to diagnose concussions on the sideline. They do it, but it's not very accurate, it's not very precise. So what we do is we work with the ASU football team, and many of those players have sensors in their helmets. And those sensors tell us how hard a hit was, when it happened, what angle it came from, and we can pair that real-time data with samples that we collect from the players weekly. So that means that we'll get a good baseline of typically what these samples look like from the player. It's like blood, urine, and saliva. And I know that's a fun job to collect, huh? And then whenever they do have a hard hit, when they're playing football, we can look at the samples after and see if there are any measurable changes. And if there are, the next step is to see if we can use that change to detect concussions on the sideline with more accuracy and more precision. So that's what we're working with on football. We don't do it alone. You've seen some names of collaborators as I've gone through my slides. And we actually collaborate with companies around the world. The only continent that we're not in yet is Antarctica. It's just we haven't found anybody there yet that we can collaborate with. So our company of about 200 people has 447 partnerships around the world. So this isn't something we do alone. And our network becomes our patient's network, right? So if we're working with a family whose child has a rare disorder, and we find out the expert that is working on something very closely related to that what that child is going to lives in Poland, there's a chance we know them, and we can connect them so that they're the first ones to know when something does come up that will be an advance in what they're seeing. So now let's kind of shift to the career side of things. These are the kind of career paths you could take in a research institute like TGEN. Now, just because you start as a research associate doesn't mean you can't be a faculty professor later. So it's not that you pick one and you have to forever be that, right? But these are just different ways to think about the careers at TGEN, the different positions we have. So first of all, say that you want to be the one that is the boots on the ground, you're pipetting, you're doing cell culture, you're working with those sequencers you saw, you're keeping the lab notebooks, troubleshooting things. You would want to be a research associate. To be a research associate, you would want a 4-year college degree. Some people at TGEN have started with an associate's and then finished their 4-year degree when they were at TGEN, and TGEN will help students with that, and I'm sure many other institutes will as well. Staff scientist is similar, although they're taking one thing in the institute and making it work well every time. So that might be tissue processing. They want to make sure that goes well, so they'll do that every time and keep us on the cutting edge of that. Depending on how complicated that is, a staff scientist could have anything from a 4-year degree all the way up to a PhD. Now, say you were really intrigued by this kind of video game side of what we do, and you want to be a bioinformatician. We've had bioinformaticians with 4-year degrees all the way up to PhDs, although we do have one right now that started with his 2-year degree and is continuing to work towards his 4-year degree while he's at TGEN. So it depends on how much ownership you want over the project. If you want to be the one calling the shots and deciding what everyone's going to be doing, you want to have that PhD. But if you love getting deep in that code and working with that, you could be a bioinformatician with a 4-year degree as well. Now say you do want to be that leader, and you want to be the one that decides what kind of projects they're doing, how we're paying for it, all these different things. You would want to get your PhD. So after your 4-year degree, you'd go on to graduate school. Your first job out of the gate would be a postdoctoral fellowship. Now what this is, it's like a trial position, so you can get used to what it's like to be doing this kind of work. You're doing your own projects, but you're still a little bit in training. After that, you would go on to be a faculty professor to run your own lab. Now say that you really like the concepts here, but you don't necessarily want to be doing the science itself. There are many roles in research administration that can be just as important, and TGEN could not function without them. One example is clinical research coordinators. They are the go-betweens between the lab and the clinic. They get to know the doctors, the patients. They get to know the researchers, so that if there are any questions on either side about a study, they're there to help. They're there to let the patient know what we do need and what we don't need, what the study is going to entail, all of these different things, explaining the consent. And so that way they get to work with a lot of different people, but they also get to still be close to that science. Another example is we have people that specifically look at, I'm sorry that this is flashing like crazy right now. Oh, just kidding. Good. So there's a whole division that works on the ethical side of what we do. They want to make sure that we're protecting patient data. Education and outreach is part of research administration. Our fundraisers are a part of research administration. There's so many different roles in there that aren't just working in the lab. Now, one thing that I would give as a piece of advice if you're going to be a scientist or not is if you are interested in a career, try it out first. And there are a few ways to do that. The minimal, you can interview someone or just talk to someone that's in that career. Find out what the day-to-day is like. A topic might be mind-blowing when you're reading about it or learning about it, but until you know what the day-to-day is, you don't know if that's going to be the right career for you. Or you can shadow someone in that career. Get an idea of what their daily day is like, right? Or get an internship somewhere. And then you really get to try out that role and see what it's like. Now, TGEN does have some summer programs for students. This is in Phoenix, so in case you would be able to be in Phoenix for the summer, I want to tell you a little bit about these programs. You just have to be 16 years or older of student status and Arizona resident. You do have to apply to all of them. We take about 65 students for both programs each, well, 45 in one program and 20 in the other program, but we get about 500 applications each year. So it's something you would want to spend some time on if you were applying. So the TGEN Bioscience Leadership Academy is a 2-week program for current sophomores and juniors in high school. You learn from Ijen Scientists and their collaborators and physicians about the biomedical pipeline, and when you complete the program, you receive a $1,000 scholarship. Now, if you're a graduating senior, you would be thinking about Helios Scholars at TGEN. This is for 45 students every summer. It's paid, 8 weeks full-time, and you're doing a real research project under the mentorship of a TGEN scientist. So this is really where the rubber hits the road, and you get to do that research yourself with the help of the scientists and their lab. They teach you everything you need to know. These are the areas where you can do research, your internship could be in. These are also the different areas you'd learn about in Bioscience Leadership Academy. And the students also do professional development. It's not just doing the science, it's getting the word out about your science and talking to collaborators and learning what that process looks like. And at the end of the internship program, the students present the results of their projects at an intern symposium. So that's all goes into that communication of being able to talk about your science. Very important. And with that, that is TGEN. These are just the smiling faces of TGEN. I'm in there somewhere. Oh, there. Okay. Get away from that slide then. So, with that, are there any questions? Yeah.
Are there opportunities for bilingual outside of, so in the administration portion, I would suspect, like Spanish, English, that sort of thing?
I would say that a lot of that is with our collaborators that are on the clinic side, but I'll tell you a couple of examples. So there's a question about how would being bilingual really help you with this. For our clinical research coordinators, it would help because they would be consenting patients into studies, so giving them all of the kind of fine print of that study. And there are times when the person you're working with might know Spanish, so they would want to work with them at that. Also, we actually have a memory test to help us figure out what good memory should look like in the genome so that we can better understand degraded forms of memory, because we don't know what good memory should look like. How are we ever going to understand a degraded form of memory? And we've actually just translated that test into the top 12 languages in the world. So there are some opportunities there, not as much as, say, the biotech kind of skills you might see in a CTE class. All right, so I have some ways to stay connected to TGEN. You can find us on a lot of different social media platforms. We are very active on social media. You can get updates on patients, research, technology. You can always find us on our website, and this is my name and title as well as my email in case you ever have any additional questions, or if you'd like to visit TGEN if you're in the Phoenix area. I'd be happy to check my schedule and try to accommodate. So thank you so much.